God bless you, brother.
Hey, man, you sitting there talking about how to build one of them pyramids out in the middle of that sand, and you say you're in construction too, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay, so you tell the guy with the big crane to go, all right, put your outriggers out right here in this sand, and then pick the big 50-ton stone up, and let's go ahead and set it over there. Man, that whole thing's going to fall down. I don't even know. There's no way of explaining how they did that, man.
No, I think that's what I say, and that's why I liked Ancient Angels back in the day, was like not because I believed their conclusions, but I was just like, I never really understood like the scale of all these projects, and especially like I said, it's so funny when like people who are like in the archaeology world, and it's like they speak to us like they have any kind of construction background. It's like, oh, they just got a bunch of guys to do it, and you like, as a guy who's a GC, I know you can't just get any guy off the street to go build anything, because they have to know what they're doing.
Well, that's funny, man. You know, I got kicked off of a live today. Earlier, I jumped in, and this dude he was a Freemason dude, and he kept talking about he was a Freemason, and threw that out there about 1,500 times, and I finally jumped in. I said, "Are you a Freemason?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, do you know how to cut a stone?" And he goes, "Well, we're speculative Masons." And I went, "Oh, okay," because those dudes that actually were Masons, Freemasons, they know how to cut stone like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling me how they were the oldest fraternity of men. And I said, the fallen angels are the oldest fraternity of men, the sons of God. They are the ones that swore themselves by mutual imprecations, and then they did this dirty deed. And they're the giants of the world that built the pyramids that aren't even mentioned in the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if they were such a big thing, they're not mentioned in the Bible, yet the Bible says Jesus go hide in Egypt and by the big pyramids that the fallen angels built to try to get back to heaven, but we're going to leave that out.
No, I mean, I think that is fascinating, because people do mention that, and the reason I believe that the stuff that was built, the pyramids were built before the flood, is because, like, even think about like right after the flood, you have the Tower of Babel story, and it's talking about them baking bricks. And so, like, we know that the pyramids aren't made of bricks, you know. And if you like I said, if you think about it, like, I'm sure, like, as a GC and just as a guy who likes cool buildings, like, if you could use gigantic stones, it looks super awesome. So, like, you would do that. You wouldn't bake bricks if you could just cut stuff out of the quarry like they did. Like, isn't it? You know what's crazy is when you look at some of those ones in Egypt, in like Baalbek, like in Lebanon, and you see like. It's like they cut these stones out, and it's like they were shaping them inside like the bedrock. And it's like, you know what I'm talking about with that. There's a crazy obelisk in Egypt that looks, I don't even know how much it weighs, and it's cut like on 3 sides, and it's like, but it's still attached. Who the heck and how did they do that?
There's no explaining that right there. But it's funny, I was reading in Genesis 6, right after 6:4, and he says, I'm going to limit man's day to 120 years, right after I flushed the flood. And man didn't start lasting 120 years until Moses. So all of the dudes all the way down through Abraham, they were like 170
Yeah, I know,
years
yeah,
old.
that's true.
Noah and his sons were all like 600 years old. And Shem, was it Shem or Ham? One of them said the ark was 45 feet tall and had 3 stories to it. Okay, how many boats have you ever been on that had ample headroom under the deck? I mean,
Not
I've
many.
never walked on a boat and I went, wow, man, I got 7 foot of headroom in here, enough room for a giraffe on every floor. You know, you're a 15-foot tall person when you walk into a 3-story boat that's 45 foot tall. And I just think those people were living hundreds of years. I think they were 15 to 20 foot tall. There were, it says right in the Bible in 6:4, there were giants in those days. And I can't see a giant building a building out of little bricks.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's interesting is that me and Brian, we've talked about this, and I'm not saying this is for sure what we believe, but like, it's sort of interesting, like when you see the story of the right, you know, leading up to the flood, and it's like, so it starts talking about, like, if you read how it's mentioned, where it talks about Nephilim, and then it says God basically is grieved and he's only going to give men 120 years, and then it goes right back to talking about Nephilim. You know, Brian and I surmise that it's possible he was talking about the Nephilim men, he was only giving them 120 years. Because it's sort of weird, you know what I'm saying, like how it's written. Actually, let me pull that up real quick and just read how it's written. It's written kind of in an odd way where like that's thrown in the middle when we know that God doesn't contradict himself, and we know that Moses, who's writing the book, doesn't immediately go on to contradict himself. By the way, all these people lived way longer than that right after this happened. Let me see where it's.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, right after he said that, people lived for 1,000 years, well over 120 years old. It was all the way up until Moses. Like I said, I think he was one of the first ones to be in the buck 20 range. And it's funny that he comes down the mountain with the rules and how to live and how man's supposed to operate, and he's the first one that's 120.
Yeah, even I think I was reading. I was listening to. Have you ever listened to or read The Antiquity of the Jews by Josephus?
I have.
Yeah, I just started listening to that, and it was like Jacob. I think was Jacob like 137 or something. He lived. He was pretty old, and that's way after the flood. Jacob.
Yeah.
And so here's what it says. It said here's starting with Genesis 6, and this is out of the ESV, and it says, when man became to multiply on the earth, on the face of the land, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took their wives as any of they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. But it's interesting. So it's like he's saying man's flesh. It's like obviously man's always been flesh. So it's almost like, is he saying these men are flesh that are like have these eternal spirits, and I'm not letting them live? Because then he says right after that, the Nephilim were in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And it's like, isn't it weird? It's like that's kind of thrown in there if it's disconnected from the topic of the Nephilim, because I think a lot of times people think Nephilim. Oh well, Nimrod wasn't a Nephilim because he's not called one. But it's saying the Nephilim were the heroes of old, the men of renown. So he's saying the Nephilim were men, and obviously they weren't mighty men by just being Nephilim. They were mighty men because they did things, and they did things to become legends and heroes.
That's correct. That's exactly right. I mean, there's no sense in what that comes up to, and the way that adds together for people to live for hundreds and hundreds of years, imagine right after the flood. But I saw a tick or something today where it said that, lost my train of thought. It said that Noah was the last of his perfect generations, or the generations were perfect up to Noah.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant, the way they were explaining it, that meant that everything else on the earth was entirely corrupt, other than Noah and his perfect generations. So he was like, that's why God did that and flooded the earth, because Noah was one of the only ones left that was a pure generation. I can imagine that the world was quite chaotic.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's funny because Brian says that in our Ancient Angels movie, but it says right here, because some people say like he got pushback because he's basically saying like these are the only humans left, and it's like, is that true? Well, it does say right here. It says. This is skipping down to 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. I mean, so it's kind of like, so there is the inference, and when you're saying like that Noah was pure in his generations, like we know that didn't mean he was perfect like Jesus, because there was only one Jesus, and so.
Did you say all flesh was corrupt?
That's what it says. It says all flesh was corrupted. And that's Genesis 6:12. And so like let's just go to compare. And so KJV says, and so here's the KJV. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth.
There you go.
Obviously just to play both, to like give equal credit to the other side. Obviously we could know that men could corrupt themselves without being genetically impure, but I can see the inference too that it could be because again we're talking about the Nephilim, we're talking about this corrupt seed, basically like the seed of the serpent, and then you have, I mean, all we really know is that Adam, his generations were pure back to Adam, and then so obviously God needs to keep his line clear all the way to Jesus in order to fulfill the first prophecy in the Bible, So I think that, but it is interesting the way it's written like that, where it's like, then you go into Enoch, and I believe you think Enoch. Do you think Enoch is inspired scripture?
I believe wholly that Enoch 1 is inspired scripture.
Mm-hmm.
It was found in the caves of Qumran. When you start reading Enoch 2, and it says Noah's face was glowing and he had blue eyes, and it just gets so weird at Enoch 2, and I'm like, and you can almost tell it's written in a different era. Enoch 1 has a beginning and it culminates as to an end. It doesn't say, all right, stay tuned for the next chapter.
Yeah.
So I'm big on Enoch 1. It's on my bio page in my link tree. I printed it out. And, man, I tell you what, Enoch 1 answers a bunch of questions.
It's funny because I was not here until very recently. But I was reading through it again. I think basically after we made this movie, I was forced to defend my position so much about these people that keep going back to the sons of Seth, or the sons of God were sons of Seth, and it's like, if God wanted to put the sons of Seth and sons or daughters of Cain, he would have wrote that, but he didn't. He clearly wrote the sons of God, and again I said, so if the sons of God weren't divine beings, go explain the book of Job to me. Where the sons of God are presenting themselves before God and Satan's with them. Oh yeah, that's weird.
Right
That's weird.
Satan's right there. I tried to tell my father, he's Jill's father. He's a Pentecostal preacher, or used to be when he was, of the age of work. And I was telling him, I said, Job, I think is one of the oldest books in the Bible.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I believe they said that was the oldest manuscript they found was the book of Job.
You got to be careful how you lay it down like that, because he almost jumped out of the chair, and he was like, Genesis was written in the very first book of the Bible. It's like,
Well, I think that's where people get into, like, where we know that, like, obviously we don't know that Job, somebody before Moses wrote Job, but I guess the point is, I think they were saying, like, that obviously you can imagine when, Moses wrote the book of Genesis, we probably don't have the first copy. Like I probably don't have the original. So then you get into, like, is it possible that the book of Job, the manuscript, is older than the oldest copy of Genesis? Like I guess I don't know. I don't know how they date things that are that old.
I like the way that you said the story, though, because the sons of God, or the angels, are standing there, and Satan was among them. And
Yeah.
God, he's having a conversation with sons of God and Satan, and he's like, hey, man, what do you think about my guy Job?
Yeah.
And, when did that conversation go
Well,
down? Where were y'all exactly?
Well, right, and so then you go, like, if that wasn't clear enough that the sons of God are depicted in there are divine beings, you go later when basically when God is given given Job a talking to, and he's saying basically, where were you when, it's like when the morning stars of the sons of God were shouting for joy when I was laying the foundations of the earth. So you're like, so I imagine there wasn't anybody. There was no people there when God was laying the foundations of the earth. That was before they were here. That was before he created Adam. And so
I got a flat earth buddy on here, man. He's funny, and I love to talk to him. And I've taken down all of my videos that have anything to do that discuss the shape of the earth. At least I hope I have. So I tried to, because there's no definitive answer. Because I was not there when he could lay a tape measure upon it.
right.
Nor can I have to agree with that. But after reading Enoch 1, there's no way to describe the shape of what that realm would be, because there are mountains and rivers under the earth, and there's flaming fires that the angels are imprisoned in. There's portals that the sun goes through, and I'm sitting there going, describe that shape.
Well, I think I like the way you just said that, and I think that's the place where I've come to too, where I'm thinking like that the reason people can't, like, they get, it's almost like the shape is a little bit of like, you're not getting the whole picture of what people, even the flat earthers are saying, because we're talking about, like, I like what you said, it's like a realm. Like, so this is like, so God created a place for us, and it's an enclosed place. I mean, based on like there's waters above and there's waters below, and then like, so what is in the middle of here? And I know that like based the way it's described in the Bible, and I said, like, so these are the kind of things that like, if you believe what the Bible says, there's really no debate. There's waters above and there's waters below, and God caused the waters to gather, and then the earth appeared. So the appeared amongst the waters, and so. But that's what I like to think, where it's like that. I believe that there's a firmament it is fixed, and only God in water is above it. And then after that, you have the stars that are fixed in it with the sun and the moon. You know, that's the way the cosmos is. So like when they started to explain the cosmos based on what we were told, it doesn't really it doesn't work in that model. We're talking about two different things completely. Like there's no we don't believe there's a pizza box floating around in the vacuum of space. It's just it's all. But I mean, again, it's like I think that's like. But I like what you just said. It's like when God is saying these things to Job, it's like, do you know the answer to these things? I'll answer you if you tell me. I got some questions for you. And he's like, and obviously the inference is there's so many things you don't know. You can't question me because you have no idea what you're talking. You're a little out of your depth.
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. I mean, because nobody knows the shape of the earth. And I was telling people, I said, we're trying to figure out how water stays on a ball, or we're trying to figure out how to see the South Pole from the North Star and the Southern Cross from the and I'm sitting there going, hey, listen, I could win both sides of this argument easily. But one thing that we can't do is we can't even figure out, I know it's off subject, we can't build a blade of grass.
Right.
We don't know what the gooey crap is in the middle of a seed that would make a tree and other fruits. So we're all trying to figure out what shape this thing is on, and we literally can't even build a blade of grass. We can't make a seed. We can't create that at all. We can't even explain it, and yet we're trying to figure out how big this thing is that we're standing on.
Right.
And I'm like going, you can't figure out the stuff in your hand.
Yeah, I like the one part when, again, it's like when I'm sure you've read the book of the Esdras too, like the apocrypha. And I just got that book of the apocrypha, and I was reading through all the 50 books. And I liked the first Esdras was like a little boring because it was more like Nehemiah and Ezra from the Bible. But the second one was when he's talking to the angels, and the angel's like, I'll tell you if you can tell me how much the wind weighs, and like measuring like the weight of the fire, and then if you can tell me how many openings there are to hell in the ocean and all this stuff. And you're like, obviously there's a lot of stuff that we have no idea.
Have you read the book of Jubilees?
It's funny the way the book goes, because I was reading through a part of it, and I think I was reading today I was reading basically God on Mount Sinai was telling Moses to write the days of creation. He was telling him about like the things that were happening then. But I've not read the whole thing yet.
Well, it's sort of like Genesis expanded. Enoch is Genesis 6:4 on steroids. And the book of Jubilees is almost a rewrite with a beautiful colored detail of the book of Genesis. I mean, it tells you who Cain's wife was, where he went. It goes through a very detailed story, and it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls right there next to Genesis. The book of Jubilees is legit as well.
Yeah. To go back to Enoch though, but it was funny. So when I was saying I was defending my case about the sons of God being divine beings, I was like, and so here's my conclusion, because I was like, I can back up Enoch, most of what Enoch says, based on what the New Testament said. And if you think about it, like when you have Jesus and the apostles quoting things that happened before, you can pretty much always go back to Isaiah or Daniel. You can go back to the Psalms, and you can see what they're referencing, because again, it's like Jesus wasn't who he said he was unless he was fulfilling all the prophecies from the Old Testament. Because the spirit of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So like God is telling you the things that he told you before, and he told you, basically, obviously Jesus is the fulfillment of those things. So when they start quoting things that are found nowhere else in the Old Testament but in Enoch, because I said, like, you can't find one reference to angels in chains in the Old Testament, but you hear Jude talking about it, you got Peter talking about it, you got John talking about it. Well, that's weird that these angels sit in Hebrews. It talks about the angels who sinned, and then so obviously the book of Jude, he goes on to quote first, and I saw you did a video about this. He quotes First Enoch 1 chapter 9, verse 9,
Jude.
and he called
Jude 1 verse 14. I've got it right here. That's why I had to get up and go get my Bible, man. He says, this is in Jude 1 verse 14. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these things, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince them that there are ungodly among them all, their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and all of their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. That's word for word the last verse in the second chapter of Enoch.
Yeah, no, it's that's what I'm saying. So I think the one thing you can see, and even when Jesus, when they start talking about who are these brothers and this woman married to in the resurrection, in the resurrection, and he's like, you guys got it wrong because angels aren't supposed to be married. And then so somebody was like, they're like, aha, so therefore the book of Enoch's not true because angels married. And it's like, that's actually a quote from Enoch, is that it's saying that in the book of Enoch that the angels, no, they weren't supposed to get married. Remember, this is why they were getting punished. Like it actually, I think that Jesus is quoting from that. And even if you think about in the book of Enoch, it mentions the place where the bad angels go, this lake that never stops burning, this place, this fire. And it's like, that's not mentioned in the Old Testament either. But Jesus talks about the place that's prepared for the devil and his angels.
I have to disagree with you on one point.
Okay.
The angels do marry. My wife is right in there.
There you go. Okay. I'll give you that one. But yeah, so I started to think, and I said, so if you really think about it, so if Jesus said that when the Son of Man returns, it'll be like the days of Noah, is it? I think it's quite possible and probable that these things were taken out so that we would be like spiritually blind, or a lot of people would be, because again, like nobody could ever cling to that Sons of Seth interpretation if the book of Enoch's in there, because obviously it obliterates that whole concept that it was other like godly men, laying with immoral women. They created giants somehow.
Man, Matthew 24 says it very clear that those will be taken as in the days of Noah. I mean, right after, and it's 24, 29. I love this. People, I had a guy, he goes, are you pre-trib or post-trib? I went, I don't know, have you read Matthew 24? And he goes, I don't know. And I turned it around to him and it says immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened. And it tells it God's coming. Jesus is coming in the sky. And that's funny, God's coming. And I said, Jesus. And on that other kick that I got kicked off on one of those dudes, he goes, is Jesus God? And the dude that was answering the question, the reason I jumped onto the live, I was like, he goes, yeah, he's part of it. I said, dude, Jesus is God. Are you kidding me? He told the devil in the desert, when he was being tempted, he said, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God.
Yeah, and then put the Lord thy God to the test. But yeah, no. So obviously, that's where we come down to. It's like that's the spirit of Antichrist is to deny Jesus. So like, and that's obviously that spirit is alive and well these days.
Well, it's all over the whole place where all that fighting's going on.
Yeah.
All the fighting that's going on. There's a bunch of non-Jesus believers on all the sides of that argument.
Yeah.
And
I
don't condone anything bad on anyone. Please don't take it as that. But I mean, I believe in Jesus Christ, and I profess that with all of my heart. And I feel like there's a lot of people on both sides of that argument that would give me some static for saying it like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and obviously, it's like I'm sure you as a Bible believer, you believe in the fulfillment of all his prophecies to the people in that land, and obviously all his his fulfillment of everything. But it's like But if you read in like Romans 2:28, when it talks about like who's a true Jew, it's like someone who's not outwardly circumcised, but whose heart is circumcised. And then so yeah, and then so then you have Paul saying that if we're in Christ, there is no Jew nor Greek, no slave nor free, no male nor female. We're all one. And if we are one in him, then we are all Abraham's offspring. How about that? So it's kind of like, so what kind of promises does God have to people who deny Jesus? I mean, so obviously if you're going to pray for Israel, pray for both sides, because we believe in the Spirit. We believe in
the children of God.
yeah, we believe in forgiveness, and we don't believe that God is empowering militaries, to kill each other. I mean, obviously, God. We know that God, if He wanted to come down, and obviously, it's funny because a lot of times it gets quoted about the nations surrounding Jerusalem. It's like it doesn't say then obviously their Tomahawk missiles launch and they kill all the nations. It's like, no, God consumes Gog and Magog with fire, and this is like after the millennial reign. So I think there's a lot of people who like look at parts of prophecies and they're like, oh well, this is clearly what the Bible says, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on there is prophecy fulfillment. I know that it potentially could, if this conflict gets big enough. I mean, now we're really talking. I think that's what I've been trying to caution people on. It's like that if you go ahead and just believe what the news is telling you, what they're trying to do is get you ratcheted up for a war in the Middle East. And if you think about it, if America gets involved, and then some of these other geopolitical sides take sides, man, we could be talking about World War III without blinking an eye. Crazy.
In the blink of an eye, and I don't know why on earth we would believe what the media tells us at all.
Amen.
I mean, I'm sorry, but if you sit there and listen to the news and come at me and go, hey, the guy on the news just told me so-and-so, you know what? You still listening to that? Because it's just pretty obvious that they are, I don't know, I think that the fallen angels, they're still around. I think that after, not the tribulation, but after the 1,000 years when the rest of the dead yet live again. Mm-hmm. So it says after 1,000 years in Revelation 20 verse 5 or 6, it says after 1,000 years the rest of the dead will live again. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, Jesus, and then it says, and this is the first resurrection. So I'm like going, okay, well, he resurrected, and that's in the first 1,000 years. So about 1,030, I don't know how many millions of dead people got out of the ground. But when Jesus died, the bodies of many saints got out of the graves and walked through the city streets of Jerusalem. And were seen by many.
That's an interesting verse, and that's one of those ones where I think that when I was first reading that's a tough verse when you read that. Like, what the heck is that? Like, because isn't it interesting that like there's no expansion on that part of like what happened? Because that seems like a pretty significant event to me. Oh, by the way, people are just walking out of the tombs. Like, well, where did they go?
Well, here's the other thing too: is nobody really rebuts it. Like the Roman officers and all that stuff that could have easily picked up any homeless dude on the side of the road, beat him, burned him, and all that stuff, hung him up on a wall, and went, "Yeah, man, that's Jesus. We killed your dude. He's done." Okay, that's him hanging on the wall. And burned it would almost be like something out of Game of Thrones, man.
Yeah.
You couldn't identify who it was, and they went, "Hey, that's really Jesus up there." But the Romans didn't do that. Mm-mm. You know why? Because they were scared to death, because the earth shook, the ground rent, and the bodies of many people got out of the graves and were seen by many.
Yeah, what did they even said? Like they were saying that like it was like they were saying like what is it? I don't know what the verse is, but like truly this was the Son of God when all this stuff starts happening.
All of them knew they had just messed up. And I did that it got a big bunch of views on it. But Jesus was sitting there quoting a verse out of the 22nd Psalm.
Yes.
And I mean, it wasn't like the Bible was 6.5 inches thick with the New Testament and now. So Psalms, if you would have started quoting Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, or whatever, if he started quoting the 22nd Psalm, everybody would have known what it was. And the first words of the 22nd Psalm are, "My God,
yeah.
my God, why have thou forsaken me?"
Yeah,
if you
definitely.
Look at the Amplified version that goes on through it, it says, "For they gather," and this is 800 years before he's on that cross, and it says,
Interesting.
So they pierce my hands. They pierce my feet. They cast lots for my cloak. This is all in the 22nd Psalm.
Yeah.
And then, so they stick a sponge in his mouth before he can say that, because he said, my God, my God. And then they ran straight away and stuck a sponge in his mouth so he couldn't say the rest of that. And then the very last line in the 22nd Psalm is, it is finished.
Mm-hmm.
The last sentence. So they stick a sponge in his mouth, they pull the sponge out of his mouth, and he goes, it is finished. Like, yeah, you know what? If you didn't catch the first sentence and you didn't get the last sentence on this whole thing about the whole piercing my hands and piercing my feet, no, I bet all of you little Pharisees and Sadducees did not want me to say that. Surely you stuck a sponge in my mouth. I mean, why? Because I'm busting you out because everybody would know that quote, that's verse.
What's interesting is I was reading this today because I was hearing people, like, obviously the people, and I'm, like I said, I'm not judging anyone for this belief about like that like we got to support Israel because of what like Zechariah 12 says. And I was reading that and I was kind of like thinking about it, saying, I'm like, so when it says they're going to see they're going to see me whom they pierced, and then they're going to mourn, and I thought about it and I thought, like, why does anyone read that verse and assume that that's Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, coming down as the Son of Man? Isn't it more likely that the people, because he was talking about pouring out a spirit of grace on the people where they were going to mourn, and it was like, so is it possible that that verse was fulfilled, that prophecy was fulfilled with the crucifixion, like not him coming back later resurrected showing the scars, but like literally they mourned because they just killed the Son of God, like, you know, like they were realizing at the moment they did it, and obviously imagine all the mourning in the land before he was resurrected. I mean, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, when they stoned Stephen, the very first martyr, right after that, he's in Jerusalem, and he says, y'all have taken up the Star of Renton and the Temple of Moloch.
Yep.
Okay. He's talking about the building that's right behind him called the Temple, which is built on Mount Moriah, which is a mountain of sacrifice where Abraham went to go sacrifice his son. Inside of the mountaintop is a cave called the Cave of the Well of Souls. And then Solomon builds a temple on top of the sacrificial mountain where they thresh their wheat. And he builds his palace on top of Mount Zion, right next to it, overlooking the temple. So he's higher than the temple, and it took 14 years to build his house and 7 years to build the temple. So he took twice as long. He's on the mountain of God, and he built a temple over the mountain of sacrifice. And these jackwagons going to rebuild the temple in that same place? Okay, y'all missed the mountain, bro. It's on Mount Zion, God's holy mountain. You're on Mount Moriah, little very close.
That's interesting. You know, it's interesting. I don't know if I'm sure you see how my content is a little more pop culture oriented, but I found it pretty interesting. Like, I know if you know the Lord of the Rings movies and Tolkien, and it's like that in the first Lord of the Rings movies, it talks about Mount what is it? Yeah, the Mount Moria, or it talks about the mines of Moria, and it was saying that the dwarves dug too deep, and of course they find this like demon who's like shadow and flame down in there.
You're killing it, man, because Solomon had like 80,000 people working in the mountain. And it says in 2 Samuel or 2 Kings somewhere, and it says, and Solomon had 80,000 hewers of stone working in the mountain, and then he had like 70,000 people hauling trash out of there. I'm like going, where do you put 150,000 people inside of a mountain? I mean, how big's the hallway to the lunchroom? Well,
I mean, it's interesting when you think about it, like, and again, like, so you have all these like these Templar legends, and of course I'm sure you're familiar, like when the Templars, when they went like through the Crusades, they were going down under where the temple was. Obviously, they were looking for whatever Solomon put down there, whatever kind of lost knowledge, treasure, relics, you name it. Maybe they were looking for the ark. Maybe they were looking for everything. I don't know.
It's funny because the Masons who built all of that, they built the safe where you would keep that stuff. They built all the mechanisms to make the safe locked up, and then they traveled around to the other countries and, we dug another tunnel right out the back door, jackwagon, we're going to come right over here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what's funny is so I had that conversation recently when they were talking about like, well, we haven't even discovered all the tunnels under Egypt, and I said I agree with that, but we've probably discovered, well, not me and you. They've discovered lots of stuff. I mean, it's not like they just found out about Egypt like recently. I mean, like the people who believe in all this stuff, they've been looking down in the tunnels. They've been looking all around in caves under the earth. There's been men trying to find things from before the flood, since the flood, basically.
As soon as Saddam Hussein found Babylon, we have a big interest in it. We go over there, hang this dude, kill his brothers, and take over his place and build a military base on top of Babylon called Camp Alpha. Okay, so I've never been there.
Wow.
But I can only imagine that hangar number 12 at the end of the runway has got a big old tunnel in it, and they say that 3% of Babylon has been excavated. Okay, dude, come on. Babylon, you're talking about the piece that's on the surface? All you had to do is get into the tunnel matrix under Babylon.
Yeah.
That totally existed, and there you are.
Well,
and I mean, the American bases are over there in the front gates of Babylon on the 33rd degree of latitude.
Well, it is interesting when you think about like the people who believe in the as above, so below, and they believe that where the pyramids are. So like, what is under? I mean, that's what I said. I guess I said that's where the real probably all the goods is down there. And I gotta have to run into it. This is awesome, but I wanted to think what you thought about this was I was talking about this recently on like a podcast, and I was like, isn't it interesting when you find out the information where they might have found the tomb of Gilgamesh? And I'm sure you probably like I believe Gilgamesh, Nimrod, like it's like the same being, and it's like, but then so then you find out like these events are very close to like wars in the Middle East, like invasions of Iraq, like they might have found. By the way, they might have found a 17-foot king, which most of the public obviously is completely ignorant of that stuff. So that's why I said like. So if they found a possible tomb of Gilgamesh, well, how big is this tomb? Like, I want to. Can at least show us what you think it might have been, and then it's crickets after that. I mean, it almost lends credence that they did find it because, like, they never said we didn't. They never said we didn't. They never said we did.
That's the Illuminati stuff, and I say that for lack of better words, but the super powerful, ultra rich of the world that formed this cabal that runs this deal have been invaded by the fallen angels, I believe. And I don't think anybody, the world leaders are safe from being invaded from those foreign entities or those fallen angels. So, those are the people, the Smithsonians, when they went around. I have a buddy of mine and his sister worked for the Smithsonian, and they're 60 years old like I am, and they're like going, dude, there's boxes of big old femur bones.
It's just, I know that the Smithsonian's warehouse is just like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's got to be.
Well, he confirmed it. He just said, man, there's some, you can see still the big fingers and the big joints and the big toes, but they did a big cover-up operation on that, man, and I know they did.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's the thing. It's like, so yeah, I want to leave with this, but it's interesting when you think about like, so they didn't find weapons of mass destruction, or did they? Or did they find something, but it wasn't bombs. It was something. Was it something else? And I think that's what people was it because they were saying that like what Saddam thought he was like was like some reincarnation of like Nebuchadnezzar and all this weird stuff, and like like did they find some kind of Stargate or something like that? And obviously, I know we're speculating wildly, but like if you believe like obviously Trumpet and I seem to be on the same page about. We don't know how they did certain things before the flood, so it is possible that there is some ancient tech that is more advanced than anything we've got today. That who knows what could be absolutely
vibration and harmonics. I think vibration, harmonics, frequencies. Dude, you take an oboe and you can lift a piece of paper off of the carpet with it. You take 10 oboes and point them into a circle, you can lift up something that weighs a little bit. You take 10, 15-foot tall people blowing an oboe 12 foot long into a circle, homeboy's rising the air, man.
Well, what about? I mean, obviously, a completely biblical story, and it's funny how we talk about like the giants and megaliths. Just think about the story of Jericho. You got all these giants. It was like the first city they took when they went into Canaan, and they marched around. They blew the trumpets, and all the walls came tumbling down. And they were saying those walls were like, were they like 6 foot thick and like 12 feet tall?
Yeah,
Sounds like a megalithic structure.
it's super megalithic, man, and it just crumbled. And what makes a wall crumble? Vibration. I mean, we know this, man. You can just sit there and watch that thing and destroy. That would be the perfect way to destroy something. But, you know, they crawled over to that place and said, Moses sent out the spies, and they said, dude, we like grasshoppers.
Yep.
And so they got in trouble for just saying, hey, we look like grasshoppers. And truthfully, the other day, I walked up on my front porch, and there was a grasshopper about that big.
Uh-oh.
And, bro, I came at that thing really slow, man. I mean, I was like, if this thing jumps on me, I'm going to start talking in tongues and running. But I couldn't imagine that grasshopper having jumped on me and with the tongue of the Lord in his mouth. And, you know, I'm going to get it. I would have had a heart attack.
Yeah.
So you don't know how strong we are with the Lord in us.
Amen.
And that's what God got mad at him and said, hey, man, you are a grasshopper compared to those dudes. The bad thing is that you didn't realize what I had put in your heart.
Yep.
So, you know, ask David about walking up against somebody like that. He didn't even look at that fool. You know?
Yeah. Well, he knew what God said, and I think that's the whole point. Is like maybe he wasn't as brave as everyone thought he was. He just believed God.
Well, that's what
He just, you know, if he actually believed God, he wouldn't even need to be brave, because obviously what happened, and it was like, and you know that God, that David did, and I think that's the beauty of that story, because we look at it like, well, how was he going to beat him? He must have been really brave, or he must have just believed what God said, and he knew he knew there was no chance that one giant, after obviously what happened before with Joshua, how many giants did they kill, or how many? More importantly, isn't it interesting when you hear the stories about that? And as we tie back into the story of like Israel today, when God was with Israel, like there were stories when David was like when the army of Israel was fighting, and it says that the forest actually killed more people than the army of Israel did. And then it's like, and then you hear about these stories where the hailstorms from heaven killed more of the enemy army than the Israelites did. So it's like the angel with the angel of the Lord with them. Obviously, there was nothing impossible. Nothing.
I mean, if they went and looked at that city to scope it out, the one they were going to take over, and the whole city was full of giants, I mean, they didn't just disappear within the next 10 years. So, you know, you've got a whole city full of giants there that look like grasshoppers, too. And a grasshopper, I'm 6'3", and that grasshopper was about 3/4 of an inch tall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, you know, for me to say a giant's 15 foot tall, he's 3 times taller than me, or a little bit more. And I'm like, well, I don't like a grasshopper to a giant. Of course, I get my butt kicked by one. But, you know, I don't know how big these things were. And then amongst us, all the 6 foot tall people, you got them basketball players, boys, and some big guys still cruising this earth. So there could have been some really big people.
But what about? We've talked about this in the documentary. Og's bed. Og's bed's 13.5 foot long, and it's 6.5 feet wide. It's like, and then when they even talk about Goliath, like the spear he threw was like a weaver's beam. So it's like he wasn't just tall; he was probably like probably whatever when they depict, like, you know, you could imagine some of these giants might be like when you watch like the Marvel movies, you see like the Hulk. He's not just tall; he's more than tall. He's big. I mean, like these guys are.
If I was 20 foot tall, I'd be pumping stones or iron or whatever you had. I'd be like Mac Daddy Giant, you know. I mean, of course you got.
Yeah. Well, anyways, Trumpet, I got to run, man. This has been amazing. We have to do this again. We have to maybe play in one of these times, because I think this would be great.
I think I'm going to jump into lives instead of just trying to have a live, because it's just my ADD doesn't allow me to jump subjects so much, and I like just conversing with.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. This is the best, man. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate the content. You've been crushing it lately, man. Yeah, let's do this again.
Love you and love everybody out there, man. You have a blessed day.
Yeah, God bless you guys all. And again, once again, we've been talking about ancient angels and all that stuff. So if you guys want to check that out, click the link in my bio. And yeah, I'll get on here again soon this week, hopefully. And I hope you guys enjoy this. God bless, Trumpet. God bless you guys all. You guys have a glorious Sunday.
Have a blessed day, man. See
You too. Bye.